the Porsche 912, perhaps a forgotten piece in Porsche's rich history. It lived under the shadow of its bigger brother, the 911. But the 912 is more than just a piece in Porsche's history. It went on to create an entire model range of fantastic sports cars. It spawned the cars that arguably saved the company. It has evolved into one of the finest driving automobiles available today, one that stands its ground against the 911. So where did this all come from? To find that out, we need to go back all the way to 1963, where the aging 356 was being discontinued to make way for its successor, the 911. This new car was bigger and more powerful than the 356. Its engine grew from a flat 4 to the iconic flat 6, and power increased from a range of 60 to 140 brake horsepower to a range of around 130 to 220 brake horsepower. All of these changes meant that the price increased by a very significant amount, leaving a gap in the market for those who wanted a more affordable sports car. This is where the 912 came in. To keep costs down, the underpinnings were from a 356, while the body was from a 911, resulting in an asking price similar to the 356's. This recipe of essentially selling a 356 in the 911 suit worked very well, with the 912 initially outselling the 911, although it was the 911 that took the limelight. After 5 years, a new model was needed to coincide with the newer 911. This time, however, these old underpinnings could not be reused, they were simply ancient. For example, the engine used in the 912 was a modified version of the engine used in the 356, which was a modified version of the engine used in the original VW Beetle. So because they both needed a new sports car, VW and Porsche co-developed the 914. For Volkswagen, the car would be their top-of-the-line model, whereas for Porsche, it would be their cheapest offering. At the time, the companies thought of this to be an overlap in the market, but they did not have exactly the same views. For this reason, VW sold their variant with a flat 4 engine, while Porsche sold the more premium version with a flat 6 engine from the early 911 models. The resulting car deviated greatly from the traditional Porsche style. For starters, the design was entirely new and was seen as very modern at the time, although in my opinion it has not aged as well. The engine layout was also different to other Porsches, with the company experimenting with a mid-engine configuration due to the tail-heavy nature of the 911 and the 912. Over its lifetime, the 914 outsold the 911 by selling over 100,000 times. However, due to the joint venture with VW, it had gained the stigma of being a Volks Porsche, or People's Porsche, which damaged its reputation. So then in 1976, Porsche replaced the 914 with the 924, a car that was once again radically different from the previous model. Due to the 1973 oil crisis, VW and Porsche decided to also co-develop this new model. However, VW then decided to go for a cheaper and more sensible option in the form of the Golf-based Scirocco, while Porsche carried on with the 924. The resulting creation was a front-engined rear-wheel drive car that was also eventually available with an automatic transmission for the first time. Instead of being in the usual Boxer configuration, the engine was initially an Audi-sourced inline 4. The car was well received for most of its characteristics such as styling and handling, but one major complaint was the lack of power. The 924 only produced around 100 brake horsepower. However, this was resolved later in its life with the introduction of new variants such as the 924 Turbo that came with a 70% increase in power and a 20% increase in torque. In 1982, Porsche released the 944, a new model that was more of an evolutionary step compared to its predecessor. The car had slightly updated styling, as well as general improvements in areas such as the brakes and the interior, while the engine was a new 2.5-litre unit with more power. The 924 continued to sell alongside the newer model as a cheaper option until 1988. Over its lifetime, the 944 continued to receive a plethora of updates, including a 250 brake horsepower turbocharged model. The car was commercially successful, selling over 160,000 units, which made it Porsche's best-selling car at the time. This was important, as Porsche was not doing so well financially. It was replaced in 1991 by the 968 that came with heavily revised styling similar to the larger 928. The engine capacity increased again to 3 litres, and almost all parts were entirely new. In 1993, they introduced a track-focused club sport model, which was critically acclaimed. Even though the car was well received, it did not sell anywhere nearly as well as the previous models, only managing 12,000 over its lifetime. So in 1996, it was replaced by the 986 Boxster. For this total overhaul, Porsche had reverted back to the drivetrain layout of the 914, but this time it came with a flat 6 engine with lots more power. The styling was extremely similar to the 996 generation 911, and the car was only available as a convertible, with the Boxster S variant appearing a few years later. In 2004, the new Boxster 987 was released, but this time, a coupe version called the Cayman was also revealed alongside it. The new models also lost the unpopular fried egg headlights to bring them in line with the rest of the lineup. In 2011, a limited edition Cayman R was introduced that was much more driver focused. It was around this era where I believe that Porsche's entry-level model line started to deviate from being the poor man's Porsche to being the more driver-orientated lineup in comparison to the 911. There was even some price overlap between some of the higher-end and special edition Caymans and the more entry 911s. Also, the fact that the 987s were mid-engined instead of rear-engine like the 911s meant that they had a natural handling advantage due to the better weight distribution provided by the engine layout. The 987 generation was replaced by the new 981 generation of the Boxster and the Cayman. The new models further refined the recipe of the predecessors, but the highlight of this generation was the GT4. It was the ultimate Cayman. Faster, better to drive, and in my opinion, one of the best sounding cars of the century. By this point, the evolution of the 912 seems to have been almost perfected. The new car had its own unique identity, and it was almost universally loved. Until 2016, that is. Because in 2016, Porsche revealed the new version of the Boxster and Cayman, called the 718. And while it had the usual dynamic and aesthetic improvements, there was one significant difference. The old naturally aspirated flat 6 motor was gone, and in its place sat a smaller, turbocharged flat 4. The problem here was the sound. Despite all of the improvements Porsche made to the rest of the car, the underlining gripe from journalists and fans was that the beloved flat 6 orchestra was gone. And although the sound of a car is not technically a vital feature, it was one of the many defining characteristics of the previous models. However, in 2019, Porsche surprised everyone with the return of the flat 6 in the GT4, Boxster Spider and GTS models. If sound is taken out of the equation, the current 718 range is one of the finest sports car lineups on sale, a fantastic evolution from the 912. And if we look at the future, even more changes are coming to this lineup, with Porsche confirming that the successor to the 718 will be fully electric.